Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. We continue the next lesson, taking control of sexual desires. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله تعالى عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال كتب على ابن آدم نصيبه من الزنا مدرك ذلك لا محالة العينان زناهما النظر والأذنان زناهما الاستماع واللسان زناه الكلام واليد زناها البطش والرجل زناها الخطى والقلب يهوى ويتمنى ويصدق ذلك الفرج أو يكذبه متفق عليه وهذا لفظ مسلم ورواية البخاري مختصرة. وعن أبي هريرة رضي الله تعالى عنه قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من وقاه الله شر ما بين لحييه وشر ما بين رجليه دخل الجنة رواه الترمذي وقال حديث حسن. So this is something that we talked about, I guess, a little bit up front when talking about the hadith of Fattaqud Dunya wa Taqud Nisa. But Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, may Allah Ta'ala be pleased with him, narrated that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said the son of Adam has preordained for him his portion of fornication, which he will encounter inevitably. The fornication of the eyes are in its glance. You're going to see something that's haram. The zina of the eyes is to see something that's haram. And the zina of the ear is in its listening. I will remind people also, by the way, to listen to even the voice of a non-mahram in a way that is enjoyed in that way for something unnecessary is also a bad thing. Some people will say that this is the zina of the ears. Legally, there's no zina of the ears. But spiritually, that's exactly what's going on. One of the worst types of the zina of the ears is listening to music, because the music itself, without even getting into the discussion of whether listening to music is halal or haram, but it is one of the most nafsanically loaded types of things a person can listen to. The fornication of the tongue is in its speech. The fornication of the hands is in its grasp. The fornication of the leg is in its footfalls. So legally speaking, zina is what? It's the penetration of the male member into either specifically into the female private part, to the point where the head of the penis is obscured within the female private part. Anything less than that legally is not zina. Then afterward, there are a number of things that have certain degrees of analogy with zina, like sodomy, whether it's a male does it to a female or to another male, or like bestiality, or like necrophilia. But the asl of zina is what? The nas is for what? Is for what's between a male and a female. And so legally, that's like the last level. That's the worst thing. The person crosses that line. It's a really bad line to cross. And once that line is crossed, it degrades human society. It causes it to break down, because the building block of human society isn't the state. Again, like we spoke ad nauseum about from before, the state is this totalitarian entity that tries to be everything to everybody, but ends up doing a really poor job at it. And when it tries to be everything to everybody, it ends up becoming something pharaonic rather than something that makes people happy. Whereas a human being is meant to be happy with their family. Parents are designed to love their children. Children are designed to love their parents. Brothers and sisters are designed to have solidarity with one another by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's not all just altruism, right? When you hold a baby, the baby's playing games with you. It's putting out weird pheromones that activate certain pathways in the mother and deactivate certain pathways in the mother. And even with the father, activate certain pathways and deactivate certain pathways. With the mother, statistically speaking, the effect is stronger. Some men are completely immune to this. So they're completely stone-hearted when it comes to a child, although it's a very small minority. And in the ummah, it's a smaller proportion as well. Why? Because like we discussed about evolution and selection, natural or unnatural, from before, those are the people that are the building blocks of society. Generally, children that don't have a father to raise them and take care of them, or don't have parents to raise them and take care of them, don't do well in society. And on the flip side, the civilizations that the Muslims have built are civilizations in which strong families are facilitated versus the situation where we live in nowadays, where it's become a mockery and a farce, and then people wonder why people live in these artificial ways and why nobody's happy. But the point is that what you're biologically, physiologically, psychologically designed to thrive within your family, with your parents, with your children, with your with your family members, with your relatives, with your tribe, with your community. And so, coming back to what we're talking about is that Zina, when that line is crossed, all of a sudden all of those structures that are necessary for you to survive and necessary for you to thrive, they become destroyed. And it causes all of a sudden civilization to plummet and to go to bad places that are not good, places that harm people in their heart and in their muscle, in their in their agriculture and in their progeny, in their economy, in their politics, in their spiritual life, and in their social cohesion and well-being. It's a real problem. We're suffering from that right now in America. And there are all sorts of crises that we're trying to deal with artificial ways, and it's just not working. It's just like the Franken wheat model of trying to get people to be happy, whereas there's a set of things that you're already naturally designed to be happy with. Now, the problem is that Zina is this very attractive thing. If you cross that line, however, you sabotage a person's spiritual survivability. Because what now the horse is riding the rider. I would submit for your consideration a small point that's very easy to transmit and easy to understand at a basic level, and I want you to think about it then afterward, and you can decide for yourself whether it's something that there's some hikmah in, or it's whether it's something to be discarded. Which is, imagine a child, a baby. If you don't give the newborn baby anything to eat or drink for 3 days, will that harm the child more, or will it harm like a 40-year-old fully grown person more? The child, why? Because they're developing. There are certain developmental benchmarks. If you pass those developmental benchmarks without giving the child a certain amount of nutrition, then that child will be permanently impaired for the rest of their life. Whereas a fully grown person, because all those faculties are already developed, maybe you could even starve them to the point where temporarily some faculties of theirs are impaired, but once they eat again, the structure, the logistics, the infrastructure for all those things to function is still there. It'll be fine. What I want you to consider is that emotionally, spiritually, a child needs things to develop as well. If they don't get it when they're small, they will be emotionally, spiritually, psychologically stunted for the rest of their life. And the prime amongst those things, the child needs love. That child that doesn't receive love at a young age will not be able to learn what it is at a later age. This is also one reason that people are having great difficulty in having functional relationships with one another. This is not just me saying bad about non-Muslims, by the way. There's a remarkable amount of cruelty that's there in the Muslim world. And I'm going to say this, if you want to think I'm racist for saying it, that's up to you, but I really don't think it's racist. I actually say it with a great lamentation and with great sorrow in my heart and wish for something better. This disease and epidemic of cruelty is especially there amongst the Arabs. And I don't think from my reading of history or my reading of the history to the time of the Salaf or even more recent history, I don't think this was the normal condition amongst them. But the colonial project was foisted on them so hard that this has just become normal. And there are a lot of anecdotal examples I can give. Again, feel free not to agree with me because it's not a hadith I'm talking about at this point. But what I'm saying is what happens is then cruelty becomes like a kind of like trickle-down economics, to put it in a Reagan-esque paradigm, which is what you get treated like crap from your boss, then you come home and yell at your wife yells at the kids, the elders yell at the youngers. It's one of those things that trickles down because you want to get back at somebody, but you know you can't get back at them, so you choose like a whipping boy in order to get back at them. And this is definitely not a phenomenon unique to the Arabs, but I'm saying because the amount of cruelty, if you look at the history of Syria, just the amount of blood that was spilled. You look at the history of the Arabian Peninsula, the amount of blood that was spilled. You look at what's happening in Yemen right now, the amount of blood being spilled over there. You look at the amount of blood in Syria that's being spilled now. When I said the first Syria, I'm talking about Hafiz al-Assad killing like tens of thousands of people. Now I'm talking about like the current debacle. You look at Iraq, the bizarre spectacles of cruelty that were visited on people one against the other. Not now, but from World War I, almost continuously till now. Egypt, like I remember, I was visiting Egypt. There was an uncle who took me around to see different places. We went up to the Qal'a up on where the Masjid of Muhammad Ali Basha is and all that, the fortress of Salah ad-Din. And he casually passed by a place. He goes, that place, I was actually tortured in that cell one time. And I'm like, really? He's like, yeah. I said, what did you do? He was like, yeah, I just was going to Fajr very frequently, so they put me in for 2 weeks and they tortured me, and then afterwards they're like, don't come to the Masjid Salah. So this guy seems to be like, he was a very pious man, he recited the Quran and things like that. He couldn't immediately see the permanent strain on him psychiatrically right away. But a normal person, it's going to have some effect on them, right? And people, their level of resilience in terms of their emotions and their psychology, it varies from person to person and from circumstance to circumstance. And definitely there are certain practices that you can have in your life that allow you to increase your resilience, whatever it is. But sometimes people will break, and that's not because you're not a pious person, because everybody has their limit. But the point is that you can't just live like that. Like North Africa, the amount of cruelty that the French imposed on the Algerians, on the Tunisians, the amount of cruelty. If you read there's a Danish convert to Islam. I don't even remember his name. It's like Holombe, something like that. He wrote a travel log of passing through Syria. He basically bought a car and wanted to drive from Morocco to Egypt during the Italian occupation of Libya. And he just describes all the crazy things that he saw in Libya. Just crazy cruelty. It just makes you, like, even though it's like 100 years ago, it just makes you want to cry and like rip the hair out of your face and like just, how could this happen? How could something like this happen? And all of that cruelty, you think he didn't spill over to them, the time after the Italians left? Of course it did. And then the cruelty of that period, you think it didn't spill over until today? Of course it did. And so the only way to break the cycle of cruelty is to have mercy on one another. And what does mercy mean? Mercy sometimes means not punishing people who are guilty in order to break the cycle, because an eye for an eye will leave the whole world blind. At some point or another, people have to forgive one another and just say, for this haqq of Allah Ta'ala, we're going to break the cycle. But that requires a type of courage I see it in certain individuals, but I don't see it communally in the Ummah right now. But we have to get to that point. That healing what's broken is more important to us than retribution and revenge. And coming back to what I'm saying is that, children need love. If they don't get love at a certain time, they grow up very dysfunctional, and they cannot learn from love that they receive later on what they lack from the love of their parents. This is one of the reasons why Zina is so completely horrible. Which is what, in Zina, the father and mother have no connection with one another, or the connection that they have because it's not followed with commitment. At some point or another, a child will always wonder, like, why me? What's wrong with me? Why does my father not love me? Why does my mother not love me? Sadly, these feelings are there then in the dysfunctional households of people even who are married, which is even more perplexing in some sense. Obviously, it's legally less problematic, but the harms are there. That children grow up without the attention of their father, they grow up without the attention of their mothers. My I'll go ahead and share a number of personal things to illustrate what I'm trying to say. Perhaps it's a bad idea. The mother of my older children, my wife, she was there for the kids like 100% of the time. And this kind of work that I do, it's very difficult to earn a living. So from time to time, I have to travel, like coming here. And from time to time, I had to like be gone for long periods of time. She's always there for the kids. Allah Ta'ala. I have a second wife as well, who's the convert to Islam. And alhamdulillah, we had a son 1 year ago. And he's a very sweet child. And there are many people, even in the Muslim community, if you say like more than one wife, they'll scream and shout bloody hell, bloody murder. But I look at my son and I say, if there's anything wrong with what I did, I don't see it because of how beautiful this child is and how much I love him so much. But coming to the point, she herself, because she accepted Islam maybe about 4 years or so before I met her, she had children from before. So she got married, she's my same age, but she got married when she was 18 to like her high school sweetheart. She had 2 children. That marriage didn't work out for some really kind of horrific reasons. And so that marriage dissolved when she was pregnant with her second child. So she said that I had to work in order to support my children because my ex-husband was not there. He later on did pay child support, but for some time he didn't have his wherewithal, and he wasn't there for his own kids. He wasn't there physically, he wasn't there economically, he wasn't able to be there for them. And she said that imagine like I was myself pregnant at the same time, and I also had to have my like child that's like less than a year old. I had to go and give this child to daycare and go to work, and then I had to come back. She said I'd cry the entire way to work. Once I started working, I would just do my work. In my lunch break, I would cry, and then I'd cry all the way home, because I'm separated from my child. And then I had to do that with 2 children. And she said that in some ways, having this child is a completely different experience because I get to stay with him the whole day. She's like, I'm so thankful I get to stay with my baby. I don't have to give him to anybody. He's mine. I keep him right next to me by day and by night. And I think this is kind of like a weird and creepy thing for people to think about because nobody really idealizes this anymore. They think of it as some sort of like torture or some sort of oppression or whatever. But man, all I can say is, as far as I can tell, as a third-party observer, it seems like a really creepy idea to just give your kid to a stranger. And this is why Zina is bad. Is because the child is not going to have the love of their parents, and it's going to cause the child a number of different types of stunting in their development, which they're going to have to struggle a lot to be able to get over to the point of being functional again. And it's definitely a disadvantage. Not to say bad about a person, but to deny that it's a disadvantage is I feel like very dishonest. A person can get over it to the point of functionality again, but it requires a lot of hard work and a type of courage very few people have. But imagine, a child saying like, why does my father not love me? Why does my mother not love me? Every other kid has their father and mother like to take care of them. Why doesn't what's wrong with me? And to internalize that, like something's defective about me. How is that kid going to be able to like have the basic level of self-confidence in order to, just do things competently in life, in order to be a husband, in order to be a good brother, in order to be a good member of society, in order to worry, care for other people when no one else cared for them. They have no qiyas, they have nothing to make an analogy about like caring for somebody else on. That it even occurs to them that this is like really a good thing to do and like to know how to do it even if they think it's a good thing to do. And it's really problematic in so many different ways. And so this is one of the many reasons that zina is like, this is a horrible thing. A person, it's intuitive to them why it's a horrible thing. When a man and woman commit zina in a way that there's no obligation, there's no relationship, it's completely just like a one-night stand or what they refer to nowadays as a hookup. The problem is what? Is that in the spiritual world, in the physical world you're degrading somebody else, in the spiritual world you're just degrading yourself. That there's a natural bond and there's a natural love that a person will feel for somebody that they share this experience with, and to completely be dehumanized, to completely dehumanize it, to be like, yeah, I love this person, I'm going to throw them away. Outwardly you're throwing them away, inwardly you're throwing yourself away, you're cheapening yourself as well. And when you do it enough, you start to see yourself as cheap. And you start to behave as a cheap person. And that doesn't lead to anything good. And I think this is one of the reasons that we live in the kind of the age of the cult of self-esteem, where people are like so obsessed with self-affirmation. It's because you don't have to affirm yourself that much if you don't have an issue. It's because people think that people inside the deep core of their self, they think of themselves as garbage. So they have to keep putting themselves up. Whereas if a person has some sort of self-worth inside, they don't have to obsess with these things. They don't have to have a Napoleon complex in order to, I'm short, so I should prove to everyone how tall I am. They don't have to have that. Same thing with this kind of form of feminism where women think so lowly of other women that they believe that, they're oppressed until they can behave like a man. It's this weird paradoxical type of problem inside. It's very difficult. A normal person will not be able to see beyond the cages of their pain and of their suffering in order to be liberated from it. And it's very difficult. It's easy for somebody from the outside to judge a person because you don't know what it's like going through it. I don't know what it's like going through it. Alhamdulillah, I don't know what it's like going through it. But now I have family members and loved ones that you see them going through it, and you know a little bit more about it. It's a little bit easier to kind of sympathize with what people are going through, while at the same time saying, this is awful, I would never want to choose this for anybody. If someone's going through it, let's help them out for sure. Let's feel sympathy for them. Let's help them out. Let's be there for them. Even then, you can lead the horse to water, but you can't make them drink. You can't help a person who doesn't want to help themselves. But, it should be obvious to a person why this is not something you would want to go through, right? Someone, for example, is disabled, they're blind, or they're unable to walk. Do we say they're any less of a human being? Absolutely not. We help them to try to live as fulfilled of life as they can, and we be there for them, and we affirm their humanity. At the same time, does it mean that a person should voluntarily want to be blind or want to be unable to walk? Absolutely not. That's just a type of madness. Rather, it's a challenge Allah gave somebody, Allah rewards them for struggling with it, and ultimately those things will be whole again one day. And I think one of the weird things about the age we live in is that these types of problems that people have, someone's like, well, what do I do? I'm attracted to the same gender. Okay, we don't say that you're garbage and you're a horrible person and you're a bad person. It's a sickness, it's an illness that you're tested with. You have to resist it as much as you're able to. Allah rewards you for resisting it. We don't throw you away, cast you away. But on the flip side, we don't say, this is great. Let's have a parade for you. That's just dishonest. You're just lying to them. You're just harming them. It's not good. And people are happy to lie to one another in order to suit their own agendas. But I hope it's clear, why this test is there, because the nafs has a very strong attraction for good reason. If men were not attracted to women, the human race would go extinct. As a prepubescent child, I used to think all of this was very gross. Then what happens is that hormones hit you, you become like an adult and whatever, all of a sudden the attraction is overwhelming. But it still doesn't escape me that this is all kind of gross, isn't it? But it's very strong forces that are pulling at a person. And so the dignified relationship between a husband and wife is a way of not making it gross anymore. It's a way of not spreading disease. It's a way of doing it in a way that has a good outcome, that you can say, look, this is my child, these are my children, this is something good happened from this. Whereas the outcome of zina is just, it's like gross. It really is. It's gross psychologically, it's gross physiologically, it's gross in so many different ways. It's just, and spiritually, it's really just not good. The Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam said in another hadith that I didn't include over here, that the believer is not a believer when he's committing zina. Rather, his iman separates from his body and hovers over him while he's committing zina. And if it didn't hover over him between him and the heavens, the adab of Allah Ta'ala would have struck him, that it shields him from being struck down in that moment. It's a bad thing. It's not a good thing. And so all of these things, all of us will be tested by them. The solution is to get married. People say, oh, you should start fasting. Fasting only for people who cannot get married. The solution is what? Is to get married. This is why traditionally in Muslim societies before colonization or secularization or nationalization or republicanization or whatever weird mazalim were imposed on the common Muslims who just wanted to worship Allah Ta'ala. The solution was what? When a girl hits puberty, she was married. When a boy hits puberty and was competent enough to be able to take care of a wife, so it's not exactly the same age, but it's not all that much further off, they would get married. And this desire should have a halal outlet. To tell a person to just abstain, it's like telling a hungry person all the food around you is haram, stop, don't eat. Like, how long is that solution going to last for? This Babu, he can't even wait until the next break, he's already eating something, right?
They want to go bad.
Of course, right? But I'm just saying, like, it's not a solution. It's a solution for like an hour. It's a solution for 2 hours, for a day, for 2 days, for 3 days. But like, how long is it a solution for? The solution is what? To get married. And anybody who makes marriage difficult is doing the devil's work. Anybody who facilitates marriage, that person is doing the work of the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and serving the ummah of the Prophet ﷺ. Of course, this doesn't mean that someone should be reckless. There's an entire paradigm through which marriage works. You should read about it. There's a whole legal framework and whatnot in it about it that I think people are ignorant of. They're not cognizant of when they go into marriage, and then they have problems afterward, and then they blame this and that. This is also part of the fard ayn of a person who wishes to get married. Is you have to learn about both marriage and divorce before you get married. And before you get divorced, inshallah, you never get divorced. And so, but that being said, the correct way of doing marriage is something that needs to be facilitated. This whole idea of somehow or another, you wait till you're like a MD, PhD, president of the United States, and then afterward you'll get married. That's like just a bad idea. And it's not congruent with the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. I can understand delaying the marriage of a boy if he's unable to competently provide for his family. But the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ is two things. There's no barakah, there's no khair in delaying them. One is a janazah when someone dies. If the body is washed and is shrouded, then there's no khair in delaying it. There's no good in delaying it. It should be the person, the janazah should be read, the person should be laid to rest on the ground. And the second is when a girl hits the age of maturity, she should be married. Obviously, we've gone very far from the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. So far that if a person mentions it, everyone will cringe. Maybe half of you are cringing right now. What am I supposed to do about it? The Rasul ﷺ said it. If you don't believe me, go look it up. And maybe we're not in a situation to make amal on it, but right action can only flow from right understanding, right thought. First, you have to fix it in your mind and in your heart. Then afterward, if Allah gives you tawfiq, you can do it. If not, then, at least you get the reward. Niyatul mu'mini khayrun min amalihi. But this is the way things should be. There are exceptions to the rule, but the rule, you don't learn about the rule by the exception. This is how you will stay away from it. Telling somebody, wait like 4 years, 6 years, this is a good way of having people commit zina or become weirdos or like do other little things that people do when nobody's looking in the darkness that are gross and end up messing them up in other ways or whatever. That's not how we should live. A normal person should have a halal outlet, and then thereafter it makes it easy for them to abstain from zina. It's not easy in an absolute sense. Maybe a person will be tempted or have some issues, but there's at least some kind of viable game plan for most people at that point. Whereas this idea of just being like, just wait, this is not a viable game plan. Yes. Is tawbah for zina different than tawbah for other sins? No, it's not. I mean, zina in the sense, the idea that two people consensually could commit zina, then no. If someone like forced themselves or lied or cheated or did something like weird or whatever, then yeah, there's a haqq of the other person that's involved. But if it's, in the situation where it's consensual, it's not different. And the thing is, zina, again, it's not a fiqh dars. Zina has a had involved in it as well. And so the had is almost impossible to prove. Because what is it? It's either by iqrar, either a person has to go in front of the judge and admit it themselves, or they have to commit the act in such a way that 4 people witness that act of penetration, like the thread goes through the eye of the needle, which is problematic. Why? Because that doesn't happen. Someone says, well, what about pornography? Well, they have to actually eyewitness it. So they have to literally see it. It can't, according to the more correct opinion, can't even be like through a camera or whatever. They have to be eyewitnesses. And they have to be upright witnesses whose witnesses accepted in a court. What's the problem? Shahad Adal is a person who is sahib sharia wal muru'a, right? That they have to be a person who is scrupulous in their observation of religious commandments, as well as a person who's known to be of generally good character. Such people usually don't witness people committing zina, right? The people who actually are there and watch these things are all of a sudden not eligible as witnesses in the court anyway. So it's almost impossible to prove. I have actually asked many people in my studies, I have yet to see any documentation of a court case where someone has been convicted of zina through 4 witnesses. I'm aware of it having occurred. It may have occurred at some point or another. Then the question is, well, what if you committed zina? Is your tawbah consist of admitting in front of the judge? And the majority of the ulama say what? That you shouldn't go and admit to a judge. The hadith of the Prophet ﷺ about a woman who admitted to having committed zina, the Prophet ﷺ turned away from her 3 times, ignored what she said, in the hopes of what? Her just going away. And then at the end of it, he said, well, are you pregnant? And she's like, yeah. He's like, go deliver your child. In the hope she wouldn't come back. And then she came back with the baby, and he said, well, the baby has to be weaned, breastfed. And sent her away in the hope she wouldn't come back. And then finally she came back, and she still, she still admitted to it. And at that point, there's no way of warding off the had. So she was given the had punishment. And she was stoned to death. And the Rasul ﷺ told the people who were stoning her not to curse her, because if her tawbah was spread over all of the people of Medina, Allah would have forgiven all of them from the intensity of her tawbah. But this was something that she did in order to assuage her own guilt. The fuqaha still say it's still better, it's superior to what? If it happened, just keep it to yourself. Never tell anybody about it ever again. And move on with your life. And so that's, yes, in that sense, it's the same with the caveats that we mentioned from before. And so this is something everybody will be tried with it. Everyone will be tested by it. And you have an opportunity that some people's fitna, their test and tribulation will be harder than others. A person has an opportunity then what? To either let their private parts give in to the zina of their eyes, ears, hands, feet, of their tongue, of their heart, or to resist it. And may Allah Ta'ala give us tawfiq to be from the latter. And he also narrated from the Messenger of Allah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, whoever Allah has protected from the evil of that which is between his 2 jawbones and between his 2 legs shall enter paradise. This is a similar narration to the one before, but it's not exactly the same. So we move to the next chapter. Islam, levels of submission to the divine. Allah Most High says, "O you who believe." So the idea is what? We talked about the limbs. We talked about the eyes. We talked about the ears. We talked about the stomach. We talked about the tongue. We talked about the private parts. These are all the things that have inroads to the heart and affect the heart. Now we're going to talk about tahalli and takhalli. Those things that you're supposed to adorn your heart with as good attributes and that make your heart more powerful. And those things that you're supposed to leave, that you're supposed to cast away from your heart, that weaken it and kill it. So from the bab of tahalli, we talk about what? Islam is virtue. Allah Most High says, قال الله تعالى يا أيها الذين آمنوا ادخلوا في السلم كافة ولا تتبعوا خطوات الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين. وقال تعالى فلا وربك لا يؤمنون حتى يحكموك فيما شجر بينهم. وقال تعالى فلا تخشوا الناس واخشون ولا تشتروا بآياتي ثمنا قليلا ومن لم يحكم بما أنزل الله فأولئك هم الكافرون. Allah Most High said, O you who believe, enter into submission completely, and do not follow the footsteps of Satan, for verily he is a clear enemy unto you. And he said, Nay, by your Lord, they believe not until they make you the arbiter in that which they disagree between themselves. And Allah Ta'ala said in his book, so fear not the people, rather fear me, and do not sell my verses for a cheap price. And whoever does not rule by that which Allah has sent down, it is they who are disbelievers. This is what the obligation of every Muslim to kneel and to bow in front of the hukum of Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Islam is not your ethnic identity. It's not your cultural identity. I mean, it's not your ethnic identity at all, and it's not your cultural identity in the sense that primarily it's not your cultural identity. Saying Bismillah and Inshallah, Mashallah, putting a piece of cloth on your head, growing a beard, wearing a turban, these are not the things that essentially make you a Muslim. What does the word Islam mean? Islam means peace. It doesn't mean peace. No matter how many Ammus who are completely unprepared and unqualified to represent the Muslims at interfaith dialogues will repeat this nonsense. It's not true. What does Islam mean? Submission. You give up. Allah wins. You give up. You no longer fight against Him anymore. That's it. Again, it sounds very odious to America because, America, freedom, But the thing is, the only true freedom is in the slavery of Allah Ta'ala. The one who is a slave of Allah Ta'ala manumits him from the slavery of all other things. The person who doesn't accept the slavehood of Allah Ta'ala, that person will be made the slave of everything, every base and vile thing. Those people are the slaves of their sexual perversions. Those people are the slaves of money. Those people are the slaves and the worshippers of power, of position. Things they don't even seem to enjoy anymore. Things that are literally killing them. Their own addictions. But they would rather be slaves of those things rather than being a slave of Allah Ta'ala. This is really something bizarre. Whereas the people who are the slaves of Allah Ta'ala frees them from slavery of money, of addiction, of perversion, of sickness, of abuse. They may have an uphill battle in order to free themselves, but the golden path has been shown to them that this is the way that you will be freed from all of these vile and disgusting things. But the problem is, as long as we resist it, what do? Who's the one we harm? We don't harm Allah Ta'ala, we just harm ourselves. And we have these discussions. Even inside the masajid, we have this discussion. Someone will say, this is the hukum of Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Brother, it's not practical. This is the sunnah. Brother, it's not practical. Brother, it's gonna, whatever, we have a fundraiser coming up, politics, this, that, we live in America. The most well-known and loved hadith of American Islam, يجوز في أمريكا ما لا يجوز في غيرها. Rawahu, I don't know. But somehow or another it seems keep coming up again and again. Right? The idea of American exceptionalism, which is not all that exceptional. Right? There's not a different deen in America. Okay, we will procedurally do things a little bit different because we're in a different time, a different place. So maybe having the talk in English, on Friday night seems like a better idea than having it in Arabic if nobody understands Arabic. But the idea is that the ruh, the spirit of all the things are the same, and the sacred law is the same, the creed is the same. And, plan B is to stick to plan A. That's the only way we're going to go anywhere. And the idea with the message is the person who denies some of it is as if they denied all of it. In the Aqidah sense, is absolutely true. If you deny even one verse of the Quran, you're a complete kafir. This is, again, remember we mentioned yesterday the difference of opinion with regards to Tawbah, that if someone makes Tawbah from some of their sins, it's still valid, but they're still obliged to make Tawbah from their other sins. But there was another group of mashayikh and ulama who said, no, you have to make Tawbah from all of them, because if you don't, it's as if you're holding something out. And we said that the first is the more correct opinion. But in terms of Aqidah, anyone who disbelieves in something, a letter of what the Prophet ﷺ said, that person is disbelieved in all of it. Just like the Banu Israel, Yahud and Nasara, they disbelieve in even one Nabi, they disbelieved in all of them. كَذَّبَتْ عَادٌ الْمُرْسَلِينَ. Why? They actually were actively just disbelieving in one of them, but they disbelieved in all of them because you don't get the chance to pick and choose. يا أيها الرسول بلغ ما أنزل إليك من ربك فإن لم تفعل فما بلغت رسالته النافع فما بلغت رسالاته. Suyuti, or Sahib al-Jalalain, who wrote that part of the Jalalain, writes لأن من كتم بعضه فكأنما كتمه كله. Reach my message. And if you don't, then you haven't made reach my message. You haven't made reach my messages. The two of them have the same meaning. Why? Because if someone conceals part of the message, it's as if they concealed the entire message. Spiritually, without this understanding, you will again make your deeds dead on arrival. Because if you're picking and choosing, you're not doing it for Allah's sake. You're doing it for what? For your own sake. Again, there's a difference between someone accepting that this is what's right and this is what's wrong and not being able to bring themselves to do it, versus a person who makes an excuse for themselves in their head that, okay, I do this, but I'm not going to do that. The latter makes all your deeds dead on arrival, because the only reason you're doing the ones that you want to do is because you want to do it. There's no proof that you're doing it because Allah Ta'ala commands you to do it. This is why your fard prayers actually have more reward in them than your nafil prayers by a factor of 70. Everything, fasting, everything, sadaqah, whatever is fard, by a factor of at least 70, there's more reward in it than in the nawafil. Why? Because the thing you do because you accept Allah's compulsion is a more perfect act of worship than the thing that you do because you have some choice in the matter. That's why Islam is what? Islam. Submission. The beast will come later. But Islam means what? Submission. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله تعالى عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. Oops, I keep trying to move the document to the wrong computer. It's a typo here. قال رسول عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يكون هواه تبعا لما جئت به. So this is the only hadith in the entire collection that's not from Sihah Sittah, but there's a long discussion, a long tahqiq of it. Both Imam Nawawi and Hafiz ibn Hajar both say that it's the narrators of it are upright narrators to the standard of the of Sahih. So that none of you will perfect his faith until his desires conform to that which I was sent with. What does this mean? Obviously, there are a lot of things Islam commands you to do that your desires don't conform with. For example, people who are not accustomed to reading Fajr, it's very difficult for them to wake up for Fajr. They're not like, oh, great Fajr, right? Rather, it's really excruciating for them. But a person who is not habituated to praying Fajr, even though it's excruciating for them in the beginning, after 40 years of waking up for Fajr, what happens? Even if you don't set your alarm, you might wake up at that time anyway. Or if you wake up later, it will only be like 10 or 15 minutes later. Why? Because you worked on yourself in order to what? Mold your life into what Allah Ta'ala loved for you. This is a struggle people have to do, people have to make. And the result of the struggle is good. This struggle is what makes the righteous, the salihin, into the salihin. It doesn't come natural for certain people. A very good hadith to illustrate this is the one we read at Dawah Qasim on Friday night. Al-Mahiru bil-Qur'ani ma'a safarat al-kiram al-barara. ومن يتتعتع فيه وهو عليه شاق فله أجران أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. That the person who's proficient in reciting the Quran, it's as if he's one of the noble angelic scribes, noble and righteous angelic scribes that record the commandments of the Lord. As for the one who stutters when they recite, and it's difficult for them, that person gets double the reward. Now, what happens is a person starts off, oftentimes, more often than not, stuttering when they read, slow when they read. And then years pass by, and then that person becomes proficient in recitation. That person will, in their proficiency, receive the reward of the stuttering. Why? Because they had to work through that to get to this place, and they had the intention that no matter how badly I stutter, I'm still going to keep reciting. Whereas the person who got it easy in the first place maybe won't get the same amount of reward. The idea, though, is that somebody after will be discouraged. They'll be like, well, it's easy for them. And you don't see that most people, it wasn't easy for them. It's a process. The idea is you have to go through this process. You surrender your nafs to Allah Ta'ala. He takes it from you. Your hopes, your dreams, your desires, your tastes, your wants, you sacrifice them for Allah Ta'ala, like the sacrificial lamb on Eid. They're gone. You no longer have them anymore. You kill them. Allah Ta'ala gives you something better in return. The point is not to kill yourself. The point is what? When you see that what Allah Ta'ala's mu'amala is with the righteous, then you say, I would happily give up my nafs for this. In fact, the Hayat al-Sahaba, there's a narration in the Hayat al-Sahaba, obviously it's, transmitted from the other bigger narrations, other bigger books of narrations, about the companion, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, Abdullah ibn Hudhafa, that he went out in the path of Allah Ta'ala. They fought the Romans and were captured, and they were amongst a large contingent of imprisoned Muslims. And the Romans, their commander, told them, accept Christianity, leave your Islam, and I will, we'll set you free, and we'll give you this, and we'll give you that, or stay a Muslim, and we'll kill you. And so he made a special effort on Abdullah bin Hudhafa, radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And he said, I'll marry my daughter to you and make you a partner with me in my rule, in my position. And so he said no. And so there's a medieval torture device. It's like a bronze cow that they would light a fire underneath, stick a person in there, and basically fill it with oil or water and boil a person in it. And you could hear the reason it's a cow. One of the reasons is there are holes in it so that you could hear the person screaming, and actually the screaming would echo in weird ways, and it just make it even more frightening sounding. So they when he refused, they grabbed one of the Muslims and they put him in there, and so they boiled him so bad that you could see that his body was boiled so badly that the bones were exposed, the flesh separated from the bones. And so Sayyidina Abdullah bin Hudhafa radiallahu ta'ala anhu started to cry. And so the Roman, he's like, got him. He's like, why do you cry? Are you afraid to die? Are you afraid? He says, Wallahi, I'm not afraid. He goes, will you become a Christian? Will you join me? He's like, absolutely never. He said, why you cry then? He said, I wish when I see what this brother of mine gave for the sake of Allah Ta'ala and what Allah Ta'ala will reward him with. He goes, I wish that I could go through all the difficulty and horror that he went through. As many times as I have hairs on my body, for the sake of Allah Ta'ala. So of course, this Roman, he's a Christian, they believe in God, they have some sort of idea of righteousness, they think arrogantly that they're right and nobody else is. But this moved him. And he's like, he says, no, he says, accept Christianity and marry my daughter, I'll set you free. He says, no. He says, okay, kiss my forehead, I'll set you free, like a sign of respect. He says, no. He says, kiss my forehead and I'll free you with, I forget what the number was, but it was some number of Muslim captives. He said, when I thought about the freedom of the others as well, I thought it would be prudent for me to show this respect to him so that I can spare their lives and take them with me to Medina. When Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu heard this story, he got up and kissed Abdullah bin Hudhafa on the forehead and said every believer who sees him should kiss him on his forehead. But it's also narrated that until the day he died, his friends, the other companions, would jibe him, joust him. I can't believe you kissed that kafir. And they would all laugh about it. And he would just repeat. He said if it wasn't for sparing the other Muslims because I wouldn't have done it. But the idea is what? That's what the idea of Islam is. That's what the idea of this submission is that you give something up for Allah's sake and you get something back that's better than it. قال يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين. That the Shaheed of Yasin, he said that after they killed him, the first thing he said after his shahadat, he said that, I wish that my people knew how much my Lord has forgiven me and how much my Lord has made me from amongst the people of honor because of this. And so that's what the whole idea of Islam is. It's not to bum out the rest of your life, and Muslims are masochists, so you just kind of taking the beating. It's not that. If there wasn't something good in return, then nobody would have wanted to sacrifice. That would have just been stupid. I think, inshallah, we will go ahead and take some questions, inshallah, before breaking for Maghrib. If there are any questions, inshallah. I don't want to push over so that we delay Maghrib. I would like to pray Maghrib as soon as it comes in. Can somebody get me a tissue or a napkin from somewhere? Questions? We can keep reading if there's no questions, inshallah. One of the things I feel bad because this course should be taught, week after week, and it should have a lot more time dedicated to it. So if you see me kind of hyper tweaking like Moana Saba meth, we're trying to get through the topic. The idea is that I want to say the things that I want to say. You'll have the text and you'll have a lifetime to read. One of the weird phenomena that we have in America is khatib workshops. It's really weird. For a person to want to be a khatib is somewhat, I feel abnormal within the context of Islam, or at least Islam I'm familiar with. And then on top of that, they have a khatib workshops, and usually more sisters come than brothers do, which is commendable in a sense, but alarming in another. If someone of you has tried, hopefully not the sisters, but if one of you is tested with having to give a khutbah, or even the sisters, if you're tested with having to be a youth director or having to, give some halaqah or this or that you feel you're not prepared for, this is really, these topics, these hadith, these ayat are really good. It's really good material for you to be able to share with people. Because people say a lot of stupid off-script things when giving khutbah. And instead of giving a khutbah about the latest Marvel movie or whatever, which is real, these things happen, mashallah. Don't do that. Stick to Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. It's always the best. Are there any questions? Inshallah, we can continue then, inshallah. We 5:15, so we'll go all the way up until 5:10. And then if someone has to make wudu or whatever and you want to excuse yourself at 5:05 or so, that's also okay. قال تعالى وما أمروا إلا ليعبدوا الله مخلصين له الدين حنفاء ويقيموا الصلاة ويؤتوا الزكاة وذلك دين القيمة. وقال تعالى لا تبطلوا صدقاتكم بالمن والأذى كالذي ينفق ماله رئاء الناس. وقال تعالى يراءون الناس ولا يذكرون الله إلا قليلا. The people were not commanded except for to worship Allah, making their religion sincerely for Him and disinclined toward any religion but His. What mukhlisin al-din? What does ikhlas mean? What does ikhlas mean? Ikhlas means to what? Make something pure. The opposite of ikhlas in terms of the spiritual discourse of Islam is what? So ikhlas means sincerity, to mix your deen purely for Allah Ta'ala. The opposite of ikhlas is showing off, riyah and sum'ah, doing things to be seen or to be heard. Allah Ta'ala said in His book, do not invalidate your charity by seeking favor or causing harm through it, like the one who only spends to show off to other people. If you give sadaqah, you're not supposed to expect anything in return. If you do, you invalidate your charity. The idea is you do only for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not for anyone else, not the person being given, not the people being seen. Now, as a person who's been tested with having to do fundraising in the past. And fundraising is this complete dysfunctional debacle in the Muslim community in America. We're not going to get into right now. But yeah, sometimes you give charity publicly, it's good because it encourages other people. Because people do things, they follow the examples of people that they think are like their peers. That being said, when it comes to giving the khutbah, when it comes to giving charity openly, when it comes to whatever, like we said, there's a portfolio that a person has of deeds. Some are high risk, high return. Some are low risk, low return. Anything you do in front of anybody else is high risk, high return. If you have the idea in your head that I'm going to do something that will inspire other people to do it, it's high risk, high return. If you really did it sincerely for Allah Ta'ala, then you can accumulate a great amount of reward. But if there was some inkling, some small percentage even of hope that someone sees you and praises you for it, or that a special brother or a special sister sees and likes you for it, or that you show off to your professor or to even your parents, even to your spouse, even to your children, that will completely invalidate the deed. This is an extremely high risk and it's extremely perilous. So my advice, very practical advice to everybody, because the day of judgment is a real day. Everyone should have, people have a spare, they'll keep $100 tucked in another corner of their wallet in case they need it and it's an emergency or whatever. Or they'll keep a spare key somewhere under the mat or under a stone or somewhere or another in case they're locked out of the house. Your backup little rainy day fund for Yawm al-Qiyamah should be some deed that you do that nobody else ever knows about. It shouldn't just be one thing, okay, I did one thing one time, okay, I'm saved. No, it should be enough that you are willing to meet Allah Ta'ala with just those deeds. You should not be surprised if things you did in front of other people are invalidated. Not because I'm saying they're invalid. Inshallah, Allah Ta'ala, by His mercy and by His grace, He'll accept everything, even though it's not worthy of being accepted. But you yourself should understand your own psychology and human nature enough to know which things there's a real danger. I'm good. There's a real danger that those things may not count because you showed off. So because the khutbah has to happen, someone has to get up and give it. Because the prayer has to happen, someone has to get up and lead it. Because, these things have to happen, someone has to get up and do them. If your attitude toward them is doing them like a custodian will clean the bathroom or like a garbage man takes the trash out. It's a necessity, right? If you're doing it like that as a service and as a necessity, then inshallah, hopefully it will be accepted. But very few people look at that. Even some people come in initially and they look at it that way, but then afterward when they see the perks or the benefits that people somehow, treat you a different way or whatever, it's just like this really slippery slope and it's very perilous on both sides. So practical advice before going into the chapter any deeper is what? Is that always have some deeds that you have in your back pocket that are enough that if this is all I had on the day of judgment, that I'll still feel comfortable. And those deeds should be something that nobody else ever knows about. وعن جندب بن عبد الله بن سفيان رضي الله تعالى عنهم قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم من سمع الله به ومن يرائي الله به متفق عليه ورواه مسلم أيضا من رواية ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما. Jundub bin Abdullah ibn Sufyan رضي الله عنه narrated that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, whoever speaks to be heard by others, Allah will cause them to hear who He really is. And whoever shows off for the sake of others, Allah will cause others to see who He really is. Allah will expose a person. This is really scary. If you're lucky, it happens in this world. If you're not lucky, it happens in the next world. But this is very scary. A person should do things for the sake of Allah Ta'ala and not try to portray themselves as something that they really aren't. وعن أبي هريرة رضي الله تعالى عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من تعلم علما مما يبتغى به وجه الله عز وجل لا يتعلمه إلا ليصيب به عرضا من الدنيا لم يجد عرف الجنة يوم القيامة يعني ريحها. رواه أبو داود بإسناد صحيح والأحاديث في الباب كثيرة مشهورة. Sayyidina Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala anhu said that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, whoever learned knowledge that should be learned only for the sake of Allah, mighty and majestic is He, but they didn't do so in order to gain some material of the world through it, that person won't even smell the fragrance of paradise on the Day of Judgment. Meaning, forget about going into Jannah, they won't even come close to it. This is really scary for a number of reasons. One of the bizarre tahrifat that American Islam has perpetuated, not just American Islam, I would say modern Islam, because it's there amongst like modernist, anti-clerical circles in the Muslim world as well. This idea that, the Prophet ﷺ says that, the Muslims should seek knowledge from the cradle to the grave, or that you should seek knowledge even if it takes you to China, which is, by the way, not a hadith. But, like all of these things, right? So therefore, go become an engineer, go become a doctor. The ilm of the Prophet ﷺ, the talab al-ilm faridatun ala kulli Muslim is not, becoming a doctor. It's what? It's the ilm you need to know in order to rectify your aqaid, in order to rectify your spiritual practice, in order to rectify your physical practice in Islam. Other things are also ilm, but in a secondary sense. The primary ilm that's being referred to is what Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said and commanded. Now, why is this scary? It's scary for a number of reasons, aside from the obvious set of things, of the tahrif, of like using the Prophet ﷺ's words in a way that he didn't mean it. It's scary because you have a bunch of people who said, I want to become a doctor because talab al-ilm faridatun ala kulli Muslim, and because I want to help people. And why do they want to become a doctor? Come on, Go ahead, say it. Because they want money. And it's okay. Is earning money haram? It's okay to want money. It's okay to want to be rich. Like to want money so bad that you don't pay your zakat, and to want money so bad that you're willing to lie, cheat, steal from people, and do haram stuff. That's problematic. But it's okay to want money. It's okay to want a nice lifestyle. It's okay to have a nice car. It's okay to wear nice clothes. Right? We'll get to that actually. It's okay to want these things. The problem is, look at the text of the hadith. It said, whoever learns knowledge that should be learned only for the sake of Allah, mighty and majestic is He, but they didn't do so in order to gain the material of this world through it. They shall not smell the fragrance of paradise in the Day of Judgment. Does that sound kind of scary? The original meaning of the hadith is what? Whoever learned fiqh and hadith and tafsir and the knowledge of the different subsidiary sciences of the Quran and of the Sunnah and all of these things are having to do with the deen. Because in the old days, if you became a top carnivore in ilm, you become a qadi, you become a very respected person, and a very wealthy person, and a very powerful person. Whoever learned those things in order to get the dunyawi perks with it, that person would not smell the fragrance of Jannah. But if a person approaches the material sciences and declares to everybody, I'm doing it for the sake of Allah, you better be very careful that you're actually doing it for the sake of Allah. It's better to say I'm becoming a doctor because I want to become, earn money, or because I think it's really cool, I like science is my geeky hobby or whatever. And then afterward, use what Allah gave you for His sake. Do all the things that someone who did it for the sake of Allah does. You won't be decreasing your reward for that. But if you screw it up the other way around, you make a claim, then you become what? A show-off. It's a real problem. You then throw all of your deeds in the toilet. What ends up happening is what? In real life, a person either does everything 100% to show off, or they do everything 100% evil. Even some of the most crazy doctors, and I know some really crazy doctors. Of course, not present company excluded. You guys are pious people, mashallah. But I'm saying I know some really, really doctors who are off the rocker. They know how to prescribe whatever hemorrhoid cream that they prescribe, but really they're off the rocker in every other way, shape, or form. Even those people do good things to help others from time to time. If you have the good deeds without the claim, then at least the good deeds will count. If you make the claim and you don't fulfill it, then even the good deeds are all trashed. Why? Because it's showing off. This is one of the spiritual teachings of Islam. The issue is that we don't see these things or don't understand these things or are not aware of these things. Because we don't look at this through the framework of what the teachings of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam were. So we look at a person and take every claim at face value. We think everybody who says they're doing it for the sake of Allah is doing it for the sake of Allah. And everybody who doesn't say that must be doing it for their own self. Whereas if you understand the mechanics of how these things work in the spiritual world, you'll see oftentimes the people who make less claim and less noise, they're actually the real pious people, the real righteous people, the real people that are worth taking from and worth following and worth trusting. Whereas on the flip side, if you don't know how the system works, then the squeaky wheel keeps getting the grease. People say the craziest of things and we just naively and gullibly believe them at face value. Whereas the spiritual world is in many ways inverted when compared to the material world. That the person who is the most lofty is the one who humbles themselves the most. Whereas the one who talks a big game, you better take a look and see, does this person actually live up to what they're talking? Because if they don't, this is like a real problem. And the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, I'm the Nabi of Allah. He never used to shirk back from it, right? Then you scrutinize. Did he really conduct himself like the Nabi of Allah? He did. So there are times when someone has to make a big claim, but then you have to vet it really hard. Whereas the salama is when the claim is not necessary to make, that a person should claim something less than what they have. When a person is humble and they claim less than what they have, Allah will raise them. When a person claims more than what they have, Allah will deprive them. When a person claims what they have, Allah will depose them from it. And there are a few exceptions, but the rule is what? If you talk a big game that's even commensurate with what you have, Allah dislikes arrogance so much that He will depose you from what you have. And a person should be very afraid of this. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be our protection. Sallallahu ta'ala ala rasulihi sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. There's one long narration, it's one of the longer narrations of the collection we'll read after. It's a very scary narration, but one that really drives the point home with regards to the dangers of showing off.
So you're saying if you're doing something that's worthy, whether it's an object,
what is the chapter we're reading right now about? No. What is it about? Go look at your document. Don't you have the document? What is it about? This answer is right in front of you. Anyone? Showing off. So I didn't say it's better not to do it for the sake of Allah. It's better not to say to people you're doing it for the sake of Allah Ta'ala. Be very careful about the claim. Otherwise, and that's why I kind of tried to belabor the point that if you don't make the claim but you do things for Allah's sake, then whatever you manage to successfully do for Allah's sake, at least that will count. If you make the claim and then it's not all for Allah's sake, then none of it counts. That's the point I was trying to make. Alright, inshallah, ladies and gentlemen, the Maghrib awaits us.